Well, welcome everyone to our next interview inside this firefighter resilience group. Thank you for joining us. For those of you that are relatively new around here, we started this group originally focusing on nutrition in the fire service, how to eat for health, eat for life, and eat for real. And then COVID-19 happened. And so we saw an opportunity to pivot this conversation to be a little bit broader and really focus on resilience in the fire service. So we've had quite a few esteemed guests, and today is definitely one of those. So I've invited Dr. Paul Parrish to join us, and let me tell you a little bit about Paul. So he's the medical director of the Austin Public Safety Wellness Program. He received his BA from the University of Texas at San Antonio, his MD from the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, and his MPH from Johns Hopkins University, where he completed an occupational medicine residency. Dr. Parrish is board certified in occupational and environmental medicine, and for the last 12 years, he's been a member of the IAFF and IAFC Wellness Fitness Initiative Technical Committee, and an alternate member of the NFP 1582 Technical Committee since 2017. Basically, he knows a lot about firefighter safety and protecting you in your work environment. So he's also a member of the ACOEM Public Safety Medical Group. Prior to his work in public safety medicine, Dr. Parrish served 9 years in the U.S. Air Force. Thank you for your service. And is currently a flight surgeon for the Texas Air National Guard. His research interests include fatigue risk management and testosterone deficiency, which I'm excited to talk a little bit about those here during our interview. So thank you, Paul, if that's okay that I call you Paul.
Please do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for just joining me here today and helping us continue this conversation just around what it means to be resilient. So I would love to hear just a little bit from you about what got you into public safety medicine of all things.
Well, it all started, I guess, in my residency when I did, part of the residency training was doing a rotation with the International Association of Firefighters, and the program still exists and was there years before me, where a resident from Johns Hopkins would rotate and work in the health and safety division. And so I took my turn during residency, and I think I was there for 3 months. I had to make a long commute from Northwest Baltimore all the way into DC, and that's where I really was immersed in the health and safety issues of firefighters, and had the chance to work on the Wellness Fitness Initiative and learn about it and all the aspects. And that was kind of the start. And then I had 2 more years after I completed my residency to serve in the Air Force. And about the time I was finishing my service commitment, the city of Austin wanted to start the medical portion of their wellness program. They had already had a exercise physiologist that they hired, and were doing annual fitness assessments, and they wanted to expand. And it just was a fit. At the time, I was stationed in San Antonio, and I'm from San Antonio, and that's where my extended family is. And Austin's about 70 miles north of San Antonio, and I had a bunch of small kids, and I had been deployed a couple of times, and they were talking about moving me to Ohio or Georgia or somewhere else. And my wife very politely asked, "Well, you're a physician, can't you work somewhere else too?" And yes. And at the time we had twins, were our last 2 children, and so they were about a year old, and they weren't much older than that. So we had a good match, and that's 14 years ago. I started working for the city of Austin, and this building was empty, and we had to buy all the equipment and hire all the people and paint the walls. It was me and a battalion chief sometimes painting the walls. He would remark what an expensive crew this was, that painting crew. So that's how it all started. I'd really say back in residency, when I had that immersion in firefighter health and safety issues, and that piqued my interest and really led me to this career path.
That's awesome. Was there a specific aspect during your residency that kind of just that really drew you in and said, "Gosh, I want to dive more into this"?
Well, there was a lot of crossover with military members and public safety workers, and so it was those parallels, I think, were a natural draw to me because I really didn't plan on leaving the Air Force. I was planning on doing a career. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed flying. I enjoyed deployments, not being away from my family aspect, but the work was very rewarding. So, but I think I saw the parallels, and I just really liked public safety people. I was impressed with the IAFF and working there. That health and safety division cranks out more work per person than anyone can imagine. And one of the things, my direct supervisor when I was starting in the health and safety division was Andy Levinson. And he was giving me my orientation early on, and he said something I'll never forget. And the whole working group also reinforced this, was that if I got a call from a member who needed help, I was to drop everything that I was doing and help that member. And they said, we only exist to help those members. And so I was very impressed by how this big international union, how well it treats its people and addresses the concerns of members throughout the country. So
yeah, that's a great call out. And that's something that, I have personal experience with. And part of why I'm also drawn to this work is, as the spouse of a firefighter, the way that we experience life in the fire service, I know is so well crafted because of the work that happens behind the scenes of the international and how they advocate for not just members on a global scale, meaning like the large body, but even just the individuals. So that's awesome.
yeah.
I am going to assume that maybe your work and the types of medical and health related issues have evolved over the last 14 years. Do you want to share a little insight from, maybe how your work has changed when you first started working on this wellness fitness initiative work to now?
Yeah, I would say that, when I was initially getting involved, there was a lot of learning for me to do about what the population was like, how it differed from my military experience. Because I think many of us can draw from our current or past experiences and try to apply them to a new population, and it doesn't always work. And there were definitely, despite the similarities, there are a lot of differences. Not only being in the civilian world versus the military world, but the demographics of the population. I didn't really quite expect there to be so many older firefighters that had these full demands that when I started, the average age of an Austin firefighter was in their early 40s. And that's gone up. It's kind of increased. So that means there's a lot of 40 and 50-year-old people doing some serious exertional type of work under some really difficult situations. And these are older people. And being an older person myself now, I really admire the fact that we have these people that have been doing that type of work for so long. So initially just shifting off the military experience and learning this new population. And then I think one of the early evolutions was how critical sleep is to this population and how unique their sleep deprivation experience is. And that's sort of where I got interested in the fatigue risk management aspect. It was very clear to me early on that this is maybe an under-addressed issue. So often, I think in the medical world, we see patients that learn to cope with their struggles or their issues, and they minimize them. And so pretty soon the whole population thinks that, the sleep's not a big issue. They're used to it, or they get to sleep sometimes. And it's been remarkable to me to just from my experience and then learning more about it to find how impactful that sleep deprivation over a long period of time is, and how detrimental it can be to their health, and how much of a foundation it is in some of the problems I think we see, health problems we see in firefighters.
Oh,
Certainly,
that's really
I'm
interesting.
sure you probably are aware of that just from a nutritional standpoint, that it can drive a lot of nutritional eating behaviors that are very detrimental to their health and well-being. So, and then
Definitely.
I think another awareness that came over years of practice was just the behavioral health aspect, how stressful this work is. I think it's probably the next big under-addressed thing. And even though we talk about it more, I still think there's a lot of improvements that could be made around behavioral health, identifying issues early, preventing them from manifesting as larger problems. That seems to be the most recent thing that really strikes me. And I'm sometimes embarrassed to think I've been doing this for so long, and how did it take, years for it to really come to a certain awareness? But I've come to accept, I think that's part of the process. You keep working at things and you realize new things as you just experience it over long periods of time. So
yeah, that's a good call, because I think those issues that flare up, they become independent data points, and so being able to take a step back and say, okay, what are some similarities that I'm seeing here? And I think a lot of this kind of goes back to the idea of on duty versus off shift, and there's a lot of things that are uncontrolled factors. When you're on duty, you can't control call volume, or if you get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but really helping firefighters and also their families understand how that shift doesn't get left at the station, but comes with them to their home environment, and implementing some systems in an environment where they do have control over what they're eating and how they're recovering, and so those life choices. And I think it's a slippery slope there with some of these things, particularly you were talking about behavioral health. It's like, hey, it was a tough shift, so I'm going to come home and maybe, I notice this in firefighters that I talk with, that first 24 hours, like, I just want to eat all the carbs, lots of sugar. And then, at night, I'm feeling really unsettled, so maybe I'll have a drink or two. And then it becomes this really slippery slope to, is this now habitual? And is this something that you're masking as a coping mechanism for something deeper? So how do you address that in your medical practice?
I'm still working on it. So, but I think a lot of it is just building that awareness. I think that one of the positive parts of our practice and our program has been to raise awareness about sleep issues. I think the whole fire service, and certainly the IAFF has led the way, but also just in our department, the behavioral health issues and the importance of that is almost a kind of a universal awareness that we do more and we've got to do better. So we have a lot of assistance, and we're coming at it from a lot of different angles. But I just try to build awareness and then find out where people are and what they want to do. So a tendency that I might have had early in my practice here is to focus on what I want to focus on, what I'm frightened about, or what I think is important. And over the years, I've learned it's much more effective to listen to the individual and find out what they're interested in. And then using something I've discovered here over the last 3 years that I think now is taught in medical schools is that motivational interviewing techniques. So asking permission, we've talked about this and that. Can I ask you about your weight? Can we talk about your weight? Or can we talk about your smoking? Can we talk about you know, whatever the issue might be that I have concern. And it's remarkable how just by asking permission, you can begin the conversation. I have the luxury of, I see all the firefighters annually. It's a mandatory practice here in our jurisdiction. We have about 1,200 firefighters. So I sort of feel like I don't ever have to hit a home run in that visit. I just have to build a rapport, open conversation, try to be someone that they would want to talk to, and just help them wherever they are. And then link them up with, when it's outside my skill set or my availability, is link them up with other people that can help them. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I think that's great to hear, you know, that it's not kind of like you said, it's just this one interaction, so I have to get it all right. But that it's about building this relationship for the long haul, because, you know, often firefighters don't leave the service, you know, they're in it for their career. And so knowing that you probably have people on the department that have been with you for 12, 14 years. So you get to know their families and stuff. So that's a great service that you provide. I would love to kind of getting a little bit more into the personal side of things, because, you know, in some of these aspects, you know, people look at your expertise and your experience and think, gosh, this guy, I'm sure, has it all together. But I would love to kind of just re-emphasize that we're all in this together, and we all have things that are going well and that, you know, we're kind of hitting the mark or missing the mark on. So tell me a little bit about how your life has been different over the last couple months amid, you know, quarantine and safety protocols, those kinds of things. What does that look like for you?
Well, in some ways, there's been the fear and anxiety surrounding the uncertainty. All of that has been very stressful, I think, for all of us, and that includes me and my staff, and so we're all experiencing similar emotions. And our work has been very rewarding, but also stressful, because we're literally creating new processes and having new problems we're having to address. And it can be a little bit, you know, particularly after doing a similar process over 14 years, and more or less my patients, you know, I see my friends every day and talk to them and, you know, hear what's going on. And now it's been a very different environment. You know, part of our operations is to do a testing site for not only public safety workers, but for city and county critical infrastructure employees. And so part of our operation every morning is we have a drive-through testing center, and we figure that out, and how we're going to meet our other demands, and how we're going to do more of a telephonic return to work process. So work has been interesting, you know, but somewhat a different stressor. I have to say that despite all the, maybe being immersed in all the medical issues and seeing how they play out, maybe I've grown a little more a comfort level with, I feel like I, at this point, know a lot more about the pandemic and the illness and the virus, and have a better sense of how it should be approached and how I should personally approach it with my family. So I think there's a knowledge has made me a little more comfortable in the whole environment. And I have to say, I love the less traffic going to. So one of the, you know, I don't want to dwell too much on it, but there's a certain lifestyle that has come along with this that I really appreciate. It's all my children are home. I have 4 children. Two of the older boys were in college, and they had to come home, and so now they're all there, and we have family dinner every night, and then there's, you know, you go out in the neighborhood, and there's parents and children walking and riding bikes, and people. It seems to be much more like, you know, every day's a Sunday, when the lot of stress from that lifestyle perspective. And I have enjoyed that. And it's been somewhat of a relief than the hustle and bustle of traditional life. So, there's been the difficult parts, and then there's been some benefits that were unexpected.
Yeah, I like that. We've been talking about silver linings quite a bit during these interviews, but also just, with people in general, some of those silver linings. So it's great to hear some of yours. I imagine with the work that you do, though, and kind of managing the medical response, how have you juggled that balance between work and home? Because I see that even with my own husband as a captain in the fire department. He's had to very intentionally create a lot more distance when he's at home because it has been emotionally and mentally exhausting. So I'd love to hear maybe some of your approach to managing that space.
So I think this is true for most of us, is when there are disruptions to our normal patterns, and if they're good patterns, that disruption is somewhat destructive, and it throws you off of what's working for you. Mm-hmm. And I would say the first 3 or 4 weeks, I lost my pattern. And I have been amazed at how many firefighters public safety workers manage their shift work and changing schedules and promotions, and they manage to keep good routines. And when the one avenue is taken away, they're able to replace it with another healthy pattern. And I've seen some of the most resilient people I've ever encountered in the public safety world in my practice. So I noticed that is kind of a key. And when I got thrown off my game and stress levels were high and I was working a lot of days in a row and we were trying to figure this out and how we were going to respond, I just noticed I had to reestablish healthier patterns. And so readopted like a morning exercise routine, because I noticed it was getting away from me, and I'm not great at night, to follow through on that. It's not my best time. I have tried with the nutrition, I've struggled a little bit with the nutrition aspects, but again, try to go back to patterns that are sustainable and that kind of give me a nice pattern, and that I don't have to use mental energy, just I can plug into and know that it keeps me right and keeps me balanced. And that goes back to sleep too. I'm a huge proponent of adequate sleep. And so I really try to do things to not disrupt my sleep and make sure that that's a definite part of how well I'm going to adhere to my fitness routines and my nutrition routines, is getting that adequate sleep.
So it sounds like you identified some non-negotiables for you, like obviously sleep, that was high priority, and you were willing to compromise other things in order to keep that a pillar in your regular routine.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, that's funny that you say that about decision fatigue. I was just chatting with my husband the other day, and he's had, a promotional process that he's been an evaluator on. And then, he's got guys that are reaching out to him. Hey, can you help me with this? And a new recruit. And he's like, I'm just so tired of making decisions for other people around training. Oh, yeah. The best thing that somebody could do is just decide what we're having for dinner. Like, I don't want to have to think about this. Can my firefighter just pick something? So that decision fatigue is very real. I wanted to touch on a little bit about some of the fatigue management, fatigue risk management that you talked about, particularly, obviously it's a predominantly male industry in the fire service. And this idea of testosterone deficiency, I see it come up in conversations with different firefighters in different departments, and some are comfortable talking about it and others are not. But I would love to get some background from you on, from a medical perspective, what are some of those initial signs that maybe a firefighter could be aware of if they need to start this conversation, just first of all with themselves, but then also with their medical provider?
Yeah. I think the testosterone issue is the one of the difficulties is that a lot of the symptoms are very similar to sleep deprivation
Mm,
you that you're already experiencing if you're a shift worker, and so it's very hard to tease out. And I've been surprised that there's not more evidence and research around this because I think the use of testosterone supplementation is fairly widespread. It's certainly in my experience, and we actually have done some just quick checks, not a thorough analysis of how many people, but in the Austin Fire Department, it might be a good 7, 8, 10%, and that's that we can count. Suspect there are greater numbers than that, and certainly when we talk about people that have tried, gone on a trial of some sort to see how it affects them. And at first, I was troubled by how many people were. There seemed to be this rush to want to be identified and then be treated. And over the years, I've sort of removed the focus towards like, this might be necessary, and why aren't we looking at it more closely and figuring out how to do it well, as opposed to just leaving it to the medical community? There's a lot of variance by medical providers and how this is being done. And there really is some protocols out there. I usually encourage a lot of the firefighters to see an endocrinologist, a hormone specialist, and get an evaluation. They have standards within their specialty about how testosterone deficiency is evaluated. But it does, overall, I just think, boy, I wish we knew more about this, because I think that in our population, we might be under treating people, and it might be a predictable pathway if you put somebody in a high stress job with lots of sleep deprivation and do that for 10 years. You might find a lot of people are having testosterone. I like to say suppression, although I just made that up because it's just how I like to think about it, is that if you took that individual and lowered their stress levels and reestablished good sleep patterns, would you see a rebound, a healthy rebound in their testosterone production? And of course, I don't think that question's been answered.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think the question has been adequately addressed with lifestyle changes. So is that even possible? Practically, could you take an operational firefighter and say, oh, well, we're going to lower your stress and improve your sleep? Well, maybe to a degree, but maybe not to the degree that it would help them recover from these low testosterone levels. So I think there's so many questions to be answered, and it's all tied into the stress of the job, deprivation, we have these people, the men in this case, that are aging and still required to do fairly exertional tasks. And so there's a lot of factors in dealing with this, and I'm just not sure we have all the answers. I'm a lot more sympathetic now to, I'm focused more on like, maybe we should be investigating how this should be done well, because it might really be a necessity for a good portion of our population.
That's interesting that you call that out, because I think, in the work that I've done with other care providers, two things usually pop up. Thyroid, I guess that suppression is a good term, but thyroid function suppression, and then also hormonal disruption. And it's such a tangled web to know what that lead domino is, and understanding the impact of, cortisol and, poor dietary habits and sleep deprivation, all of these things. And what is that lead domino? And not that you necessarily have to start there, but okay, what's the entry point in order to get some relief of these other symptoms? Because sometimes I've talked with other people like, I'm not sure if this is anxiety, I'm not sure if this is depression. And
Yes.
so being able to peel back some of those layers and say, is this a hormone dysfunction that is presenting these other indications that, maybe someone that, isn't willing to take this more comprehensive approach that just like put a Band-Aid on it. Okay, let me prescribe you an antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication, that to really consider the lifestyle and the work around that individual. And it's so unique to first responders in particular, because, someone that sits at a desk all day and is not responding to emergencies, doesn't get calls at 3:00 in the morning. Their symptoms for low testosterone are probably going to look different versus, and all of these other factors. So I'm just curious to see how that looks in your practice. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think it's I've often said the fun part of this job is that after doing it a while, I can see 50 years down the road. These issues are just going to change and evolve, and there's no way of getting around the stress, the sleep deprivation, the physical requirements. I mean, they're always going to exist, and we have so many areas we can improve upon, and the fire service has done an awesome job, really, of highlighting these issues for firefighters and taking them on. But boy, we have, there's so much more work to be done. It'll never end,
Yeah. And I think it's good to point out too that, just the nature of the work is its own beast, because, like for my husband, for example, he works 48 hours on and then has the 96 hours off. And there's only so much you can do in those 96 hours to undo what happened in the 48. And it varies from shift to shift, from month to month, from year to year, and from role to role, and what stress looks like as a probationary firefighter versus a driver versus a captain versus a battalion chief. It's ever evolving. So I love the work that you're doing and how you're taking that approach of what's important to you. Where do we start for you? What's going to feel like is making the most impact in your life today versus, no, I think this is important. So, so what are some things that you're currently doing to kind of managing all of your stress and stuff? What are some things that you're currently doing to keep yourself well?
Yeah, and I would just go back to the reestablishing new routines. So I adopted that early morning exercise, and that was a little bit of a struggle for me, because I think just as I have aged, I don't like to exercise right when I get up. And also, it happens to be both me and my wife are morning people. So we go early and we wake up. So morning is the only time where we, can be alone and talk and, kind of catch up and reconnect. So choosing to exercise during that time was a little bit of a dilemma for me initially. And I felt like as a trade-off, and I wasn't sure it was a good trade-off regarding relationships, because I think those are critical to your overall health. I mean, I talk about foundational. I think having a good, healthy relationship with your family and your friends and your community, I mean, whatever that is for you, that is also a really big health determinant. So, but I chose to kind of reestablish that morning routine. I've juggled, I'm a little bit of a stress eater, like many of us, and I, to this day, struggle with that. And so I'm trying to be a little more consistent and look at what I'm doing. You think by now I'd know, have this figured out, but I do not, just like many of the people that I get to meet with. So, and then I have for a while now, but even more so, is paid attention to the sleep habits. And I'm fairly that's probably my most consistent things. I'm very cognizant of not disrupting my sleep through variance. I really try to stick to the, in bed by 9, up by 5, somewhere around that. Alcohol intake, I really watch. It's a big sleep disruptor, particularly close to your sleep time. So I don't. Same with caffeine. I struggle a little bit with the eating later because I go to bed so early, and by the time but for me, it's just keeping those routines, and that gives me peace, and it makes me feel like, okay, I have some control, and the world is not completely disrupted. There's some normalcy to it, and yesterday was a little bit like, today, and okay, that brings me a lot of comfort. So I've just doubled down on that. We do have, I think I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of the current situation is all my family's home. So we have that family dinner at night. That's a big deal. That brings me a lot of kind of peace and stability. So
awesome.
Yeah. How about yourself? What do you do to maintain that?
So we've been having a lot of dialogue with just things that we're feeling. And there might be days that I feel strong, like, nope, we've got good systems and things are working well. And then the next day it can just be the absolute opposite. And just allowing our family to feel those things that we need to feel amidst it. So we've got 3 kids at home, all had to migrate to homeschool. And one of our 3, our middle daughter, is doing really well with it. She likes it. She even said, hey, I could do homeschooling all the time because I have 2 hours of work and the rest of the day is recess. She's 10 in 4th grade. I have a son who is, if you could paint the picture of a stereotypical boy, active, like hopping around all over the place, that's him. So online learning is not his forte. So that's been a struggle for him. But then, the biggest thing for us, we have a 16-year-old daughter who is in high school. She wants to have a normal high school experience, and she's a competitive volleyball player, and her entire competitive season was interrupted. She wasn't able to see her friends anymore. So just talking through that, I think, has really helped. And then kind of like you, we had to figure out really quickly what our new normal was. And there was so many hit and miss opportunities where we learned, like, oh, that doesn't work. Oh, that doesn't work. But giving ourselves permission to just try again. So once we had kind of a system that we thought would work, we just kept trying. And then after about 3 weeks, it seemed to get into a new flow, like, okay, everybody's up at this time. We get online at this time. We have our homework, and the big thing for me, obviously being a nutritionist, I love food, which is why I love what I do, but also it's about so much more than food. And so that family dinner time served multiple purposes. This is a chance for us to feed ourselves really well, but also to connect about the day and to talk through what we're doing. So that was our one non-negotiable for us, where other things maybe, we'd go to bed a little bit later or, sleep in a little bit from day to day, but family dinner time was kind of that non-negotiable. So that seemed to work well for us. But I would love to chat a little bit more about the sleep, because it sounds like you have that pretty dialed in. Is there 1 or 2 things that you've noticed, like, I put this into practice and it was kind of a big game changer for me?
Well, are you familiar? I often recommend this to my patients, the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. So
yep.
I really admire his work, and the book is just fabulous. And I think I tell all public safety workers, you ought to read this, because I think knowledge about sleep is so important. The book really doesn't even address their specific situation. We're not saying, oh, well, you're going to shift work and then try to put it all back together, because shift work essentially violates a lot of the best practices in order to maintain healthy sleep. So that's a challenge. But I think the most important thing I took from his book, and what I liked about his book, is he led with this and he finished with it. If I could tell you one thing, it's go to sleep and wake up at the same time every day. That consistency, your body gets trained and used to that. So automatically I've lost all the public safety workers because like, doc, I can do that when I'm home maybe, but I cannot do it when I'm on shift. I don't control that. So unfortunately, I think that highlights what the challenge is for public safety workers is having to manage that. They lost one of the best tools to optimize their sleep. So I use that one. I have adopted I don't wake up with an alarm clock anymore. So I have the confidence now of training my body and being consistent that I will wake up. Even with my early morning exercise, that used to be like, no way, if I don't set the alarm, I won't get up. But I dialed in the sleep enough to where I don't have to use the alarm clock. And there's something that I really appreciate, not having to be abruptly jolted out of bed. I can do it on my own terms. And so that's another measure that I guess that was more the consistency of sleep, I think, led me to confidently turn off the alarm clock and just my body do it on its own. I have to say the noisemaker too, the white noise machine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Particularly depending on your household, we live in a 2-story house and we got 2 of the boys above us. And it was so aggravating for so long to hear them, that the floor creaking or the beds moving around or whatever it was. It's certainly a sleep disruptor. So having the white noise on, is fabulous. It really, and my wife did not like it at first. She thought it was obnoxious and too loud, and she didn't think she would get used to it, but she agreed to try it, and now she likes it also, because it really does stop some of those disruptions that might awaken you otherwise. So
that's a great recommendation. I mean, I think about the immediate application when you have babies that you're trying to sleep train, having white noise, that makes a lot of sense. I love that you brought up Matthew Walker's book, because that was just understanding the impact of sleep. I grew up in a house where, if you slept in, like that was viewed as being lazy. So all of my teenage life was like, no, I'm not lazy, I promise. But that has shifted our perception of sleep for our kids. And so to have a 16-year-old that like goes to bed at 10 o'clock, but then she's also sleeping until 10 o'clock in the morning, to not put that burden on her, and just let her body regulate what it's supposed to do. And just to see how she adapts to stressors a little bit differently than maybe some of her friends that don't prioritize sleep as much. I've noticed in her performance and her academics as well. And I loved that book. One thing that we tried, and I'm not sure if you've tried this, have you heard of a chili pad?
No.
So it goes underneath your fitted sheet on top of your mattress pad, and it basically has like a water pump, and you can set the temperature, and it varies anywhere from really cold to really warm. So I don't have it on my side of the bed because I'm not a hot sleeper, but my husband is a really hot sleeper. So we put it underneath his side of the bed, and he sets it to about 65, and it just keeps that under sheet cool. So it keeps him cool at night. And at first he's like, I don't think this is going to work. But the first 2 nights that he tried it, it was like, I fell asleep and I woke up in the same position. And I thought, okay, this is worth every penny of it, particularly, with all that he's fighting against from sleep deprivation on shift. It's like, I'm willing to invest in this, and it's made a big deal. So, but I think we need to try some white noise. I really like that.
I'm going to try the chili pad, because in Austin, it's hot a lot of the year. You can crank down your airs. Sometimes it's just too hot. And so I can imagine having that cool surface to sleep on would be glorious.
Yeah. He is such an advocate. He tells everyone, get a chili pad. So that's been a big game changer for us. So aside from holding space for sleep and kind of sticking with that, is there anything else that you think like these are top priorities amid the added stress of a global pandemic, but just also being first responders, is there anything else you think like, gosh, these are really, really essential for people, kind of action steps that they could take to keep themselves healthy?
Yeah, well, again, the disruption of our normal routines is also our opportunities, because we have to change something. And so I think it's a good time to look at your nutrition, to look at your fitness routine, to look at your relationships, to maybe turn off the news, maybe read more books, or do your hobbies, and decompress from some of the stressful things that you're exposed to in the world. And I think those are all important things. There's a lot of discussion in the medical community too about, as this goes on and there's been disruption to normal medical care. So, I think it's important also to remember, if you're due colonoscopy screening, it's time to, don't blow that off. It's time to take care of those things. Your annual wellness visits are with your primary doctor. Those are, and as I know it's different in different regions of the country, but some of that's coming back here in Austin, where it's not just all telemedicine, everybody's hunkered down, and people are starting to just take precautions and have their regular visits. And I think that's important for the whole family, is to make sure you don't miss out on those things. So it's not just lifestyle stuff. It's make sure that you're getting the care that you need if you are under the treatment of a doctor, but also your preventive measures, making sure you don't miss out on those, because this is not likely to go away soon. And we're talking, it really could be that we're in a posture like this for at least a couple of years. And hopefully we have more flexibility and we can bring down some of the lethality of it. And but it is going to be an adjustment in life, and we need to kind of think how we can do it in a healthy way.
Well, that's a good call out, that we still have to progress through this. Even though everything for a little bit there felt like it was a hard pause. Yes. I'm in a part of the country where things are starting to reopen, but obviously with new protocols. So I think that's a really good call, because just personally, some of that stuff, it's like, well, I'm not really sick, or I'm not, super high priority. So I don't want to bother my doctor. I don't want to bother my care provider with these things. But I appreciate that you call that out, that those assessments, those annual wellness visits, or whatever it is, are still important, because they're a metric. So.
Yep, definitely.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. I love the way that you approach medicine, especially with public safety. As a spouse of a first responder, I would love to see more providers taking this approach across the country. So thank you for the work that you're doing. If people wanted to reach out to you to learn more about you, your medical practice, or just to connect with you, where would be the best way for them to do that?
Well, Lisa, I'm very technically savvy, and I'm everywhere in social media. No, I'm nowhere in media, and I'm not very technically savvy. So probably the best way to reach out to me is just by my email at paul.parrish@austintexas.gov. And I spell my last name is Parrish. And then if you ever called up to the IAFF too, they still remember my misdeeds there for so they'd be able to direct you to my email or my phone number. But so I'm a little behind the times on that, but that,
no worries.
Yeah, I do receive emails, and I do know how to respond to them. So
awesome. We'll make sure that we add your email address when we get this posted in the group, so if people need to reach out to you. So I appreciate your time today. And again, thank you for the work that you do and for your service.
Thanks, Lisa.
Really
it's great talking to you.
Yeah. All right. Well, you have a great weekend and stay safe.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.